Stable United Church of Christ. My name is Kim Wood. I am the pastor here. We are delighted that you are here for another one of our Peace and Justice speaker series opportunities. I'll let Ken tell you a little bit about that in just a moment, but first I would like to thank Corey Lindick, who provided us with some pre-program music tonight. So again, thank you. And a lot of busyness at Ottawa High in music and drama. So if you're at the high school, go to one of those and you'll see Corey will be there too. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I would like to share with you a couple of logistics. First of all, if you need restrooms, they're that way. There are two single-use restrooms and then a family restroom. All of them you can lock, so find your way down the hallway as you need to go. You don't have to wait for a break. Also, afterward, we want to invite you to share in some refreshments and conversation time. And there are a couple of our folks brought some information about their particular agencies. If you want to grab some information at the end of the time together this evening, please feel free to do so. At this time, I would like to invite the team facilitator for our Peace and Justice team. Ken, you want to come on up? Sure. Ken Brown, come on up.
I'm still greeting everyone who came in the door. It's great to see you all here tonight. Thanks for coming to our forum on homelessness. This is our 8th event in our social justice speaker series, which we started about a year ago. Mr. John Breslin, who is an attorney in town, was here the last time to speak on immigration, gave a great talk. Again, my name is Ken Brown. I'm the facilitator of our Peace and Justice Ministry team. We started the speaker series about a year ago. We've entitled this event, this is the first time we've had a panel of speakers, and we've entitled the event The Humanity of Homelessness. Our purpose tonight is to pretty much shed light on and raise consciousness about issues of the homeless, and we plan to talk about causes and solutions to the problem of homelessness, not only in LaSalle County but statewide. We have a distinguished group of panelists here who can talk about homelessness as it relates to youth and adults, and also as it results to as it affects the homeless in rural, urban, and suburban areas. So we're delighted to have them join us tonight. We're so thankful. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening. Our moderator will be Mr. Sam Barber. Sam is a member of our Peace and Justice team. He's a resident of Ottawa, and he teaches courses in economics at Joliet Junior College. So without further ado, take it away, Sam Barber.
Can everyone hear me? All right. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. Thanks for coming out to this panel. I'm very excited to get started. I want to quickly introduce our panel. To my far right, we have the Reverend Ben Adams. Ben Adams is part of South Loop Campus Ministry, among other organizations. He's also an assistant pastor at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chicago. To my near right is Carol Alcorn. She's part of Illinois Valley PADS. PADS stands for Public Action to Deliver Shelter, Illinois Valley PADS, here in Ottawa, Illinois. To my near left, we have Kelly Shymanski, who is part of the Youth Service Bureau of Illinois. And on my far left is Dan Stribling, part of 360 Youth Services. And I'm just going to go ahead and let each of our panelists introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the work that they do with the homeless. And let's start with my last mention, so my far left. Dan, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So my name's Dan Stribling from 360 Youth Services.
No, please use the mic.
Please use it.
Please use the mic.
You have to get it closer.
Very close? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Dan Stribling from 360 Youth Services in Naperville. I am the program manager of our men's transitional housing program. So we have about 40 different residents who live in our programs. We have a men's program, a women's program, and LGBTQ specific program.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Yep. And we also have a program for DCFS Youth in Care, so ages like 13 to 17. In my particular program, I work with 18 to 24-year-olds, all male-identified youth, and they can live in our program for about 2 years. And they all were experiencing homelessness before they were able to move into our program.
I work at the Youth Service Bureau of Illinois Valley. I supervise our transitional living and street outreach program, which works with homeless young adults 16 to 24. Basically, I figured out our stats today, and in the last year, we have served 83 youth in our area. So our agency in general covers a 5-county area, but I would probably say at least 75% of those youth are in LaSalle County. And I guess we'll get into a little bit later more of a definition of how we see homelessness, but we work with youth trying to help them get on their feet, try to educate them on basic life skills, get them linked to services in the community, to get their vital documents, because I'm sure you're aware that without some form of ID, it's almost impossible to get anything. But you can't get an ID without a birth certificate, and you can't get a birth certificate without an ID. So trying to help them jump through the hoops of the system. If youth are able to and motivated enough to find employment and to try to be cooperative, we're able to move them. We have a residential facility. We have a house in Ottawa and a house in LaSalle that we temporarily house them to help them. They get employment, start to save money, and then can move on to their own place. And they can stay in our program as well as, same as his, up to 2 years.
Good evening. My name is Carol Alcorn. I'm the Executive Director of Illinois Valley PADS. We are an emergency homeless shelter program. We serve individuals from infancy to 70s, the whole spectrum, anybody who's homeless. We have 2 facilities. One's here in Ottawa at 1120 Canal Street. It has 50 beds. There are 3 rooms there for families, several cribs. We have one building in Peru that houses 24 beds. And then we have a resale store in Peru that helps support what we do. They're going to be handing out some handouts here. And reason why I'm doing these handouts is I want you to understand that homelessness is a need of a house and a bed, which we provide, but we also provide a great deal more. We are more than just a bed. They get food, they get fed, they get case management, safety and security, climate control situation to live in. But we do assessments, we have case management, we build service plans. Within that, we do referrals to the community. We have classes in money management, budgeting, support groups, character conversations, job-seeking computers, parenting classes, spiritual support. So there's a lot of activities that go on that we provide and help individuals get self-esteem back, to get direction back in their life, to get through the barriers that they're experiencing by being homeless. Kelly referred to several of them as just getting an idea to get to work. I mean, that's a big one. So there's a lot of work that we do, and you can just take that home. If you have any questions after the forum tonight about any of these services, I'd be glad to talk to you.
All right, I feel like following them up, this is like, which one of these people is not like the other? And that's me. Because my name's Ben, I'm a pastor, and I don't do homeless service work for the entirety of my call. That's just a small part of my call. So I feel honored to be on this panel, but I feel a little bit like outmatched in a way. So I serve Holy Trinity Lutheran Church half-time, that's what it says on here, but the main ministry where I do work with the homeless population of downtown Chicago is through the South Loop Campus Ministry, the other half of my call. And we do that in two different ways. One is through what we call taking it to the streets. It's a ministry that is really just pretty simple. We make lunches, we pack a shopping cart full of them, and we walk the neighborhood and hand them out. That's one way that we serve our neighbors experiencing homelessness. We also, in the winter, when we're doing taking it to the streets, we actually serve soup out of a cooler. So we try to do something warm when it's cold and something that's a little bit colder when it's hot. So that's one aspect of our ministry, with the South Loop Campus Ministry. And this is all student-led. That's one of the big things that we really try to focus on, is having this. I often question, like, why is a campus ministry so involved in the work of serving the homeless? And it's because this is an opportunity to allow students to develop leadership skills, to find their voice, to find how their life is connected to these folks on the street, and how these are our neighbors and these are our residents. And even though we might feel worlds apart, we need to find ways to come back together. And we do that. The other way is through our weekly community meal. We call that the South Loop Community Table. We do that every Sunday night at 7 p.m. It's a meal that recently has been upwards of 90 people that we serve on a weekly basis. And so we partner with a campus ministry from University of Illinois at Chicago to be able to pull that off, but with our combined resources and volunteers, student volunteers. And every week it happens, all year round, rain or shine, we're there. Holidays, whatever. We make sure we have a meal ready to go out of Grace Place Episcopal Church right downtown Chicago. And so we serve a lot of folks who are chronically homeless. I think some of the stories that I might share later tonight, they're not going to always be as hopeful that we're making this huge difference getting them out of their situation, but what we're focused on is by being their good neighbors, by being in relationship with them. The meal ministry aspect of what we do is actually just the way we open the door to a relationship, and that's our main goal always. We always tell people we don't do charity, we do community, and that's what we try to take to heart every time we go out with our shopping cart and every time we open our doors for the South Loop Community Table.
All right, thanks everybody. So the first question I want to ask our panelists here. So I want to just talk a little bit about what is homelessness. How do we define homelessness? And before I ask our panelists, I want to give that a little bit of framing. In Illinois, so the total population of Illinois is 12.8 million or so. And as of 2016, a report from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development reported that at a point in time in January in Illinois, there were 11,590 homeless, which is relatively few within the context of the United States. Half of the homeless population within the United States lives in 5 states: California, Florida, New York, Texas, and Washington State. That's half the homeless population in the U.S. So Illinois has relatively few homeless in the context of the United States. Within those 11,000, there were 6,986 that were individuals, 4,604 that were part of families, 719 unaccompanied youth, 949 veterans, and only 937 chronically homeless, people who have been homeless for over a year or more than a year in the last 3 years. On the other hand, I read a report from 2017, the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, that reported that there were 82,000 homeless people in the city of Chicago alone, although 82% of them were doubled up in homes with other folks. And so they were not necessarily living on the streets or in homeless shelters. They were simply did not have homes that they could call their own. They were living at the mercy of somebody else. So sort of with those numbers sort of in front of us a little bit, I want to go to Kelly actually, since you mentioned it when you were speaking. How do you define homelessness? What do you think of that?
agency, our definition is more without a permanent place to live. And a lot of it depends on your grant. Some grants specifically say is someone without a permanent place to live. So they could be couch surfing, they could be living at a shelter, they could be living on a street. And then we even will consider those that like had an eviction notice, who are being evicted. Those, like our TLP grant, they count those particular ones. Whereas we do have other funding that says they have to be actually homeless. That means not living with a relative or a friend or house hopping. That is staying at a shelter or on the street only. So we just have to keep stats on their situation and then kind of farm out our stats depending on what definition each grant has.
Anybody else want to jump in there?
Well, I'll just say that this is a challenge that we're facing a lot with a lot of our youth, because that we have a similar definition based on our grants that if you are couch surfing, or if you are maybe living with family but need to leave at some point, or parents have told you that you have to get out of the house, we can still serve you, but I'm not sure that that's going to be the case forever. A lot of different grants are going more towards you needing to be either sleeping in a car, sleeping on the streets, or being in an emergency shelter. And so that's a challenge that we face when we're having conversations with some of the youth we're talking to, that they might potentially have to be on the streets in the future, and preparing them for that fact. Unfortunately, with a lot of the different work that we do, we all have to verify homelessness in a different way. And so I think that's a challenge that we're facing. Right now, we still are serving those youth, and hopefully we can continue to serve those youth who are couch surfing. But depending on where definitions change on the federal level or the state level, it can change what different agencies are able to do.
For us, homeless is anyone who is without housing at night. But there are individuals who are homeless that don't find a lot of help sometimes, and some of those are the domestic violence, and we do have domestic violence shelters in our county, one in Princeton and one in Streeter. And so domestic violence brings a whole different level of concern with homelessness and safety. And so we don't house them if we know that in the last week or so they've been in a domestic violence situation. We refer them to the other shelters that have security and are built for the perpetrator not to be able to get in. They're kind of hidden, or they're built differently. Also, sex offenders have a hard time. I don't know how many times we've had a sex offender. And when you have a population of men, women, and children, you can't serve a sex offender because you can't get them 500 feet or 500 whatever away from the children. So there are some qualifications then for homelessness. They're still homeless. But I've searched the state of Illinois trying to find places for sex offenders to receive homeless services, and I can't find any. And the ones that I were told were there were not. So there's a lot of different levels of homelessness that exist in our communities for many different reasons. But we serve them all except the exceptions of those two categories.
I don't really have a working definition of what homelessness is, besides the fact that I know what I see in the men and women and people that we serve in the South Loop. And for most of those folks, a lot of them do have shelter, whether it be a tent or an emergency shelter that they go to, or a single room occupancy hotel that they stay at for the night. And even though they have a roof over their head, these are folks who don't have a place that they feel is safe enough to leave their things. I think I think when I think about what the definition of homelessness would be, it would be to have a place, to not have a place that you feel is safe, that is safe and secure and is a place where you can, sleep with both eyes closed. And that's for me, I think, the defining characteristic for what I see a lot of our neighbors experiencing homelessness going through is that they're always not rested. They're always hyper vigilant about who's around them and kind of on guard at all times. And after days, months, years of being in that state of mind without having that chance to ever rest and feel safe and secure, it takes its toll. And that's what I've seen a lot of cases in the South Loop is just people who have lost the ability to even trust anyone around them anymore.
So I want to kind of come back to this side of the table a little bit, because both of you spoke about grants, the grant proposal process, and that's part of your work. So to sort of return to that, do you find that there's sometimes a tension between the need to work through that grant proposal process and also serve sort of the humanity in a homeless in somebody who is experiencing homeless at the present time? Is that something that you find in your work? Is that something that you see from day to day? Do you moreover, do you find people who are the people who come to you, are they searching for home? Is that something that you see? And home in the way that sort of Ben talked about it, a place where you feel safe. Is that something that they're looking for? Is that something that they just don't have at the present time, but they know what it feels like, or maybe they don't? What's your experience with that?
Well, just to touch on a few of those, I would think that, I think you see a little bit of everything. I think that you're going to have those who, probably more that maybe have never really had a place they felt safe, and maybe that is why they are currently homeless. And they are, I would say a majority are looking for a permanent place, a safe place to go. And that's kind of where we come in. And it is a juggle between the way the grants stipulate how programs should be, and sometimes, it's kind of like putting a square peg in a round hole, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's a juggle to kind of make it work. Mm-hmm. But sometimes when you've been doing it a long time, you just kind of figure out how to make it work. To what's in the best interest of the youth. And they are kind of coming in, and sometimes they're just looking for a few things. Maybe they're coming in looking for hygiene items. And maybe that's really a test to see if they can trust you. They'll come in and get something to eat and maybe grab a hygiene item and say they needed some information, and then maybe you don't see them again for a couple months. And then they'll come in and maybe spend a little more time, or kind of get, maybe they'll see you a few times and then they disappear again. And then maybe a few months later they'll come back. And I think sometimes that's just a trust to see if they can really trust you and if you'll be there. And I think that's a big thing they see.
I think there are a lot of challenges when it does come to grants. I think that's just the reality, but I think the other sense, we are in a business where we have to show progress as well. And so sometimes we do have youth who are not ready when they first come into our program. I know we've had several youth who came in at first and were not ready whatsoever to hold a job, get out of bed. They just weren't ready yet, and so they've left the program, and sometimes they come back and they do really well, and they finish the program and they are successful and do well. So I think sometimes we also are on a time crunch. All of our programs, we have a certain amount of time with them, and so sometimes they need to come back at a different time and experience some life, and they come back and they are more prepared to work on their goals. And so I think there are a lot of different challenges. I can think of one of our particular youth that we worked with before that I would go in every night and the lights would always be on. And we had conversations every single night about why are you leaving on your lights? Because your utility bill is going to be really high. And she never lived, she hadn't had housing for years. And so for her, she was expecting something to happen. And so she wanted the lights to be on to figure out if, you know, if there was someone, danger was going to come and attack her. And so having just safety of having a home sometimes is scary. And so it takes months for them to even adjust to being housed. And so there's a lot of different challenges when you think of the progress you need to make, but also knowing that sometimes it will take a long time for our youth to be prepared.
A quick funny story. One time, it was probably the third time in, this young man. And, you know, he would come around for a few months and disappear for a few months. And the third time he comes in, he's like, Kelly, I'm ready. I'm ready to get, you know, my head out of my butt, and I'm just ready. You know, I'm like, okay. And then he's like, where do we start? And I'm like, come on in, you know. So it's just, you know, they just have to get to the point where they're ready. And we just have to be there when they are.
That's a really interesting point. I actually want to move to a slightly different question for Carol particularly. And I wanted to ask how we can broaden our understanding of homelessness to move away from the stigma and stereotypes associated with homelessness.
Thank you. There's a lot of stereotypes out there for homelessness. You know, when I listen to your conversation about, you know, this trust and they're living on the street and it's chronic and there's no place to go, and we in the rural communities don't have as much of that. It is chronic, but we do get individuals from the Chicago area that come down here, and then we experience that with them. And you were talking about, you know, the fear of things. So there is a stereotype that, and I wanted to speak about the stereotypes that I've heard locally from community members when I'm out and about and talking. And the first one is that they think that they're all drunks, that they're just in there because they have a substance abuse. I hope that you haven't felt that way, but I get that from community. You know, I couldn't go volunteer there or do anything because they're drunk. You know, they're just you know, and it's dirty, and so that keeps you from volunteering and participating and really caring for someone because you have a perception or a prejudice that they're like that. And so that would be, and I wanted to talk about that because I took some years, and I'm just going to read off some stats on substance abuse in our program. And 1 year was 30%, 1 year was 14%, 1 year is 24%, 1 year is 15%, 1 year 18%, and 1 year 20%. Those are pretty low numbers in a larger group of people that we identified as having a substance abuse problem. And then the second thing that I hear about homelessness is they're all crazy. And we've talked about that tonight because it's a trust issue. It's absolutely a trust issue with many of them. They have become so street smart that you couldn't exist where they existed. You couldn't do it. Your skills aren't there. They have a whole different set of skills that they have developed as being homeless. And so, you know, one of the things that I hear is they're crazy. Well, I'll read you off some stats again. You know, out of a group of people that we have any given year, 38%, 20%, 16%, 17%, 30%, 18%. So it kind of goes up and down, but it's not everybody. It's not everybody. And or a majority even. You know, it's a low majority. Now, can I say that does exist in homelessness? We can. All of us here tonight can say those things exist. Mental health is a problem sometimes, and substance abuse. Sometimes it's self-medicating. Sometimes it's whatever it is. It's an addiction. So, you know, then you look at homeless and you say, they're bums. They're lazy. Why would I want to help them? They're just bums. I don't know how many times I've heard that. You know, and I come back and I say, no, they have problems. So let's talk about why someone might be homeless. Well, the number one thing locally, I don't know whether it is in the suburbs, but it's loss of job. Or no job, no income of any kind. Insufficient income. Maybe they're working and their income isn't enough. That's one of the issues we have here is that, you know, they get part-time jobs, so it's not enough to support an apartment and a car and insurance. And so they have to work 3 jobs to do that. And then it becomes a conflict of scheduling. Family dispute. Kelly said something about couch surfing, and someone else said something about couch surfing. And living with other people, and there's a lot of homeless. You referred to that in your previous comments about, you know, they're living with other people. They're still homeless, but they're living with other people. So there's a dispute of some kind, and then they're out on the street. Maybe it's only a night, maybe it's 2 nights, maybe it's 3 months, and they can repair that relationship and get back to where they were before. But homeless could be caused by that. Eviction, we've referred to that. Domestic violence is a big one. Overcrowding, no affordable housing. That's not quite the issue in this area as it is in your area, It's still an issue, but it's not to the degree. Sometimes there's medical conditions. You know, if you today became chronically ill and could not work, and your lack of work led to eviction or foreclosure, and you went through all those processes and you came to the point of being depressed and just feeling hopeless, what would you do? You have nowhere to go. Do you have family? Do you have friends that take you in? How long could they take you in? How long could they support you? What would you do? So, you know, it's not about being a bum. Although, I gotta say, sometimes their attitude would lead you to think that might be a problem. But many times it's real problems, real issues in life that has caused them. So the stereotype is there. The stereotype about shelters. Our shelter happens to be very clean. The individuals come from the Chicago area and they go, oh my gosh, this is like home. You know, it's clean and there's lockers. They can lock their things up. That's a trust issue. And they come in. They have to be there. They come in depressed and in chaos and they're hopeless and they're sometimes angry, and after a week of good food and good sleep and a bed and some case management, somebody listening and smiling to them and helping them, many times we're able to work through to solutions. Not the first time all the time, but usually.
I want to open this question up to the rest of the panel in a minute, but I wanted to mention that in my research in preparation for this talk, one of the things I came across was the list of the 3 main reasons why people become homeless: lack of affordable housing, lack of adequate income, and as an economist, I have to say. Unemployment is a real thing. Jobs aren't always necessarily there. I was looking at statistics for the LaSalle County particularly, and although right now, as of this month, unemployment in LaSalle County is 5.3%, it fluctuates pretty dramatically. Every January it goes up about 3 or 4 points. So January 2010 it was 15% in LaSalle County. And it's come down since then. Lack of affordable housing, lack of adequate income, and health issues, inadequate access to health issues, health care, I should say. All right. Does anybody particularly want to go?
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, sometimes when I hear the "why don't they just get a job" excuse, I think of a lot of the especially gentlemen we serve that have felony records. And that, when I talk to them about work and what they're able to do and what they're able to pick up on the side if they can, their biggest barrier to employment is having to check that box or a criminal record check. Even if there isn't a box, they usually do a criminal record check, and those people are ostracized from being able to be in the workforce. So to what extent are we as a society providing opportunities for people to get back on their feet, instead of just continuing them in this chronic system and cycle of homelessness? And so that's one of the questions that I would always want to ask is how are we doing that as a society? And then when it comes to the substance abuse and mental illness that we always point to as, those are the two big stereotypes that people have of folks experiencing homelessness. I always just say those two things may be at play in some parts, but in most cases that I've ever encountered, those are exacerbated by the situation of homelessness. Their homelessness is not caused because of those things, but those things have become magnified and exponentially increased in their life because of the stress and the just situations that they deal with on a daily basis. And I just think of my own self. When I'm stressed at work, I can feel my own mental health decline. I can't imagine what that would be like if I was on the verge of a mental health crisis and then having to try to figure out how to live on outside on the streets. That would send me probably into crisis, and that's where we find a lot of our folks is in crisis after experiencing so much stress. So.
Talking about stereotypes and homeless folks, or?
I think just kind of trying to add on to that a little bit, a lot of the issues around mental illness and mental health with particularly our youth is the trauma that they faced. A lot of our youth, I would say a majority of youth have had some kind of physical or emotional abuse in their lifetime, like usually from family. I have several youth whose parents died at 9, 10 years old when they were 9 or 10 years old. And so, and then, at least for us in Naperville, probably about 60 to 70% of our youth are youth of color in a community that does not look like them oftentimes. And so not only are they facing challenges in their own internal life, but they're facing a lot of challenges when they walk down the street and they don't look like anybody else, and people have stereotypes about them just because they don't look like the community. And so they come back to our program and they process with us because I've had youth who get pulled over by the police, every single week. And so how do we have those conversations with them when they're already struggling? And then they have this anger because they feel like they don't fit in where they're trying to work on their goals, they're trying to get better, they're trying to make progress, yet they feel like they're kind of on their own island sometimes. And so some of the anger and the behaviors that we see are oftentimes based on the different experiences that they bring through their full 18, 20 years of life.
I just want to say one more thing about stereotypes. I think sometimes when we get caught up in stereotypes, it blinds us to see the other real forms of homelessness that exist. And one of the real examples that I see as a campus pastor is student homelessness. A group of people who we would, they have dorm rooms or they have all these other access to places to stay, but that's not always the case. Not every student stays in a dorm. For commuter students, we might not know where they're going back to stay. And some of those students are sleeping in cars or sleeping on a friend's couch or finding any way they can to try to get ahead in school while not trying to take out more and more loan debt to make it through. So that's definitely one of the side effects of stereotypes, is that we fail to see those who are really homeless in front of us and who are really in need, because we think it's just these groups of people. It couldn't possibly be students. It couldn't possibly be working folks. There are working folks, there are students that cannot provide for themselves a safe and stable place to stay.
There are many individuals in our homeless shelter program who are gainfully employed. They're underemployed.
Yeah.
Underemployed, and it's really a struggle to find a program to help them get into public housing or any low-income regular apartment. There's not too many of those around. low rent space, so.
Okay, thanks. And I actually want to, I would like to, so this next question is for the whole panel, of course. But I want to first ask Dan. So I want to just ask quickly, thank you. I want to ask particularly about, could you tell us a story about a particular success that you've had working with somebody who is experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, so we've had, just a couple months ago, we had a youth who, his family was actually born in Palestine. And so they came over as refugees, and coming over as refugees, their family was unable to make that much money. It was a really big struggle to adjust to society here, not speaking English. And so he had several different brothers as well who were in this situation, and so he was able to get into a group home at a very young age, but he didn't have anywhere to go. His family, there's no contact with dad because his dad had a lot of different challenges too, and mom is underemployed as well, and had several very intense medical issues, so she couldn't work. And so we had this young person come into our program about a year and a half ago. And really, from that moment, you kind of see with some of these youth that all these kids need is just that chance. Someone to give them that chance to work through things, to try to get a job, to learn skills. And he was one of these kids that really wanted to learn. And he came in, and from the beginning, he struggled a lot because he had never had anywhere that he was on his own. And so learning how to do taxes, learning how to call and make an appointment to see a doctor he had a lot of anxiety from that. So even picking up the phone to call a doctor sometimes was like it could be like a 30-minute experience because we're about to pick up the phone and then we didn't pick up the phone. And then we tried again, and then we talked through what we're going to do, and then we didn't do it. And so he had a lot of skills to build over his time. But this young person now, after working really hard and having a lot of people around him giving him encouragement, has gone off to college to be a police officer. And so he's right now at Northern Illinois University and working really hard and doing really well. And I think that, and he's somebody who we're hoping maybe someday will come back and work in our community because we had a lot of great connections. We had a police department do a ride along with him, so we did one night out with the police, and he's now, I think, believes that he can have success in his life. So I think that was one really good experience recently.
Another one, kind of a little bit similar to this. We had a young man who was 18, good student, just turned 18, and within like a week of turning 18, all his stuff was outside. There was no more room for him at home. He was a good student. Maybe had some honesty issues once in a while, but I mean, he was a good student. He was doing well in school. So we were able to help him provide some temporary shelter for him, to keep him in school, and he was able to get his own apartment. And so we helped him with the rent and things like that, and did life skills with him, and helped him fill out his FAFSA. Works pretty close with, how do you, same things, just very, very basic life skills. How do you set up turning utilities on in your name? Especially when you have a family member who used your name before when you were a minor. So running into those type of obstacles and stuff like that. So, how to keep your apartment up, how to prepare for college. So he wound up staying in the apartment through college, and he left for SIU, Edwardsville, this past fall. So he's down there now. And we still keep in touch, and even got my son involved. We pack him care packages, because when I was in college, nothing's better when you're in college than getting that care package. And when you're a homeless youth, no one sends you a care package. So, and then when he comes home, he's gonna stay in one of our houses for Christmas break. And he has some family that he can go to, but can't stay there. So he'll have somewhere to go for Thanksgiving, but at least he'll have a roof over his head while he's home. So.
we had a older gentleman, it's not youth, he was in his 50s. He had been trained as an electrician and was a very good electrician. And then he was overcome by the addiction of alcohol. He lost his marriage and his home, and he was just bouncing around, living with whoever. His skill was still there, but no one would employ him because he was drunk too many times. So, but they would hire him on the side and pay him under the table, not anything worth what he was worth for the work he was doing. But he was doing it simply because he needed cash for more alcohol, cigarettes. His children had grown up and were in trouble and were addicted to themselves, were in and out of jail, always asking him for fines and money and all this, and he was always giving it to them. So his life was pretty much a mess. And he came to us the first time in that state, and we worked with him as long as we could. And he came back the next year, and we worked with him some more. And then the third year, we had started a support group, in-house support group. So we worked with him with a support group that year, and were able to get him to Salvation Army in Davenport to their rehab program, which he completed and came back. And he was doing really well, and then he kind of fell off the wagon again, so he came back into the shelter. And we worked with him and let him stay for a whole year. He was able to get a job at James Hardy, the first job he'd had in 30 years where he actually got a paycheck, where he could support himself. He was so proud of himself. He quit giving money to his family. He has his own place now. He's still working. And we are so excited for him because that was hard work for him. It was hard work for him to work through the denial and the years of the habit that he had done and the devastation in his marriage and his children and everything else, and to begin to deal with that. But we had to build some trust with him. We had to build some care with him. I have a page full of other stories here where we've helped young people and women with children and helped them get back into housing and employment. And it's a big step to ask for help. It's even bigger to sit there and answer the questions in case management. It's even bigger to say, maybe I'll work on changing that and getting it done. So it's kind of exciting to see people change their lives.
It takes years sometimes.
It does.
You got to be in there for the long haul. That's part of the issue that we sometimes face is this empathy fatigue. For some of these success stories, if we gave into that fatigue and just left people go because we're done with them, we wouldn't have these success stories to talk about. The story that I was going to talk about, I'm not going to. I had a different one that just came to mind, and so this is actually one that just happened this past Sunday. Every Sunday night when we finish our community table meal, we run a debrief, and it's a debrief that is intended so the student leaders who are working with us can process their experience, talk about what we use the image of a rose. So we talk about where was your rose, where was your thorn, and where was your bud. And so the roses are the good parts, the thorns are the bad parts, and the buds are the growth or transformation parts of the night. And so we open that up, though. There's generally, when we're about to start our debrief, there's still a few guests from the meal lingering around, and so we either invite them to hang out in the space and just give us some peace and quiet to have our debrief, or they can join us in the circle and debrief with us. And in the past 2 weeks, we've actually had a new gentleman join us in the debrief, and he, in the first week, was just, there's something happened during the meal that he was just really, captured by maybe the Holy Spirit, if we want to call it that, or whatever. And he was really inspired to like do something different for that week. And so when he came into the debrief the week before, he talked about this word commitment. And he has a hard time committing to anything because he is a user, and he admits that openly and talks about it. And so he came back the second week, and we were in debrief together, and he was so proud because that word commitment, he was using that as his mantra the entire week. And he came back and he showed us that he had a phone. And it's something that he gets a phone regularly, but he generally sells them almost immediately to buy more drugs. And so for him to have that phone throughout the entire week and bring it to us and show it to us, and to be able to come back and say that word commitment is what held me, accountable this week, and having this group to come back to and show my progress held me accountable this week, that was a huge success for us. And we ultimately, he's still not in a permanent house, and we don't have the resources to be able to do that, but what we do have is a relationship with him, and we do have a place where we can support him, and we can hold him accountable to things he says he does, and check back in with him and ask how those things are going. And if he's fallen backwards and maybe backsliding a little bit, we can give him that encouragement to get back on and to keep moving forward. But it takes having those relationships, hearing those stories, sometimes putting yourself in an uncomfortable position to have to listen to some of the pain on people's hearts and in their lives. But that's definitely the success story that I recently saw this past week.
Thank you. That was I enjoyed all this. Those were good stories. I enjoyed. So in a little while here, I want to open up the floor, take some questions from the audience. Before we do that, so I was thinking about this a little bit while Ben was speaking. I was part of South Loop Campus Ministry when I was a student at Roosevelt University, and so I was part of those debrief sessions from time to time. And you go out and you work with homeless, and then you come back and you think about it and you reflect on it. And I wanted to take a moment and ask you all this question before we open it up. I wanted to ask the question: how has working with homeless folks, people experiencing homelessness, how has it changed you personally? How has that experience transformed you, if that makes sense? How has it changed you yourself? And is there anybody who feels called to answer that?
I was raised in a very nice home. I had two parents, and they took care of me. I didn't have any needs. I have never been addicted or been, around that. And I started as volunteering first with the homeless, which I encourage all of you to do, is to find some place to volunteer, and to it opens your eyes. I realized that person walking down 251 or across 4th Street in Peru or downtown LaSalle, I had served them dinner the night before, and they were homeless, and it opened my whole awareness of homelessness in my area, in my town, that I had no concept of. Then as I began to work with them as executive director and build programs and visit with other agencies and move around the state and learn more about what to do and how to do, I was completely broken by the abuse of families. Broken. At the things that happen to people, or that they participate in themselves to break. I mean, it breaks you, or I hope it does. That you understand that you have to lay aside your prejudices and your assumptions and all those things, because there is hope, and you are part of the hopefulness. You're the handout, the hand up to people. And you can do that in your families, in your church, in your neighborhood. You can do it by partnering with agencies such as are sitting here tonight to address the brokenness of our society, the brokenness of people, and to be part of that. Yes, it's changed me. It has changed me. It's changed how I approach life. It changes how you approach people. It changes you, how you approach what you think God's love really is. So it makes a difference.
What comes to my mind when I think about this question is two things. Like growing up in a Midwestern household, suburban Detroit, I was always taught, the one thing you have in this life is your word, and trustworthiness was always such an important thing in life. But I was never really taught to trust others. I was supposed to be the trustworthy person, but I shouldn't really trust the others around me. And I think what this role has really taught me about trust is that offering that sense of trust to people, giving people the benefit of the doubt, really, and believing their stories when they tell them to you, is a powerful thing. And it really actually is a extremely difficult thing, too. And it's much harder than I ever thought it would be to really trust people. But I found that when I can offer that trust and give people the benefit of the doubt, hear them out without my mind immediately telling me they're lying to me, that can change a relationship. It can really change how I respond and change what they're willing to tell me even. So that's been huge. The other thing, growing up, I was always, my family's kind of like a Dale Carnegie family. I don't know if anybody ever has been through Dale Carnegie training. It's kind of like business, how to win friends and influence people type stuff. One of the principles of Dale Carnegie is there's nothing, the sweetest sound to anybody in any language is their name. And I've always heard that growing up, and I always wanted to know people's names and remember them and say them right and do that kind of thing. But this job has taught me just how important it is, how impactful it is to remember people's names and to be able to know people's names and call them by it without having to ask over and over again. And that's been huge for us at our community table. Like when we tell people, the one thing you come out of this meal with tonight is to know somebody else's name, that's a big thing. And if you can remember that name and hold on to it, and next time you see them, call them by it, I mean, that person has this feeling of being seen, of belonging to something, of being known. And those two things, trust and being known by your own name, has been things that have just been, in so many ways, taught to me on a deep spiritual level.
I had no intention of doing this kind of work when I was in college, and still didn't think I'd be doing it when I got out of college, and it kind of just fell into what I was doing. But I would say that with the youth that I work with are stronger than anybody I've ever met in my life. The different experiences that they've had, and yet they still get up every day and try to go to work and still try to work to get into an apartment, and they still have these dreams for their lives. And the other interesting thing that I find is that I ask them, like, well, when you grow up, what do you want to be? And I would say a majority of the time they tell me, well, I want to be a social worker, or I want to be a psychologist, or I want to be in human services. And so we've got these youth who have who've never had anything, and yet they still want to help people for the rest of their lives. And so I just find that so inspiring. I think, and I also, like, all the time, I always say whenever I talk to anybody, I wish you could meet some of these kids, because you spend a couple minutes with some of these kids and you think, wow, like, I want to, you want to take all these kids home sometimes, because they're so resilient, they have so many skills, but they haven't been able to been given the opportunity to be successful. And so I think every day I'm inspired by a lot of these young people, and I don't think I would want to do anything else because of that.
So much of what I went through is similar experiences to these guys too, but I'll never forget when I started back in social service and working with some of these youth, and probably about 6 months in, I just went home and thanked my family, because I'm like, I just never really appreciated what I had till I see what others don't. And to this day, whenever I have new staff start, I usually ask them about 6 months in, have you thanked your family yet? It's kind of a big joke, and they're always like, oh my gosh, I went home and I hugged my mom, and and it just, you're just kind of, like you said, at awe as to what some of these people have been through, the trauma, and how they do still do their best to function. And sometimes that's what their day looks like, is getting through that day. And it's hard for them to plan what they'll be doing next week or what they're doing on Thanksgiving, because sometimes they don't know where they're gonna sleep that night. So, you know, seeing that, working on relationships, and just giving them that chance. I mean, the compassion that I've just learned over the years, my door's never shut. No matter what you said, no matter what you did, it doesn't matter. It's always, where do we go from here? Let's look forward, not backwards, because that's what they need, is, you know, sometimes maybe they need to vent a bit, and you just can't take it personal. They just have been through so much, and sometimes they just need a sounding board, and, you know, and where do you go from here kind of situation. So just compassion and patience, and I guess that probably has changed me a bit. Maybe enjoying the simple things in life when more than others. So I guess maybe that's how they changed me.
All right, thanks to all four of you. Right now, I wanna open it up to the audience. Are there questions y'all have for our panelists here? Anything related to homelessness or experiencing homelessness?
I have a general question about our state being with its budget impasses for the last several years. I know that some agencies have been dramatically impacted by that. With the new budget, if it truly is a budget, are things getting better for agencies that rely on grants or a money stream from the state? Are things getting better?
Anybody want to field that?
I would.
Oh, is it? No, is it?
That's not on, by the way.
Is it not? Right.
Switch mics.
Switch
It's
mics.
not, it's not great.
That one's really not on.
It barely works. Okay.
Okay, got it.
Oh, it's much lighter too. As far as us.
Now you gotta turn that on.
Okay, oh, this is much
Yay.
better. As far as our agency, because we are a large agency and have so many different funding sources, we have managed to get through it. The last, I just heard recently that one of our grants, there's possible 5% cut on that one. You know, it's a day-by-day thing. We've managed to, like I said, probably more because of our size, we've managed to get through it. But, I mean, that's just my particular funding. I mean, there's probably 4 or 5, that's for the state of Illinois funding, but 4 or 5 programs that, like I said, just heard we had a 5% cut, but.
I don't receive state funding for what we do, because we're just a church and a campus ministry doing this. But what I will say is that I've noticed, especially in the shelters, that they've enacted new policies for how long people can stay. And so part of that is due to higher numbers going towards the shelters and asking to use those services. So the main shelter that is very close to where we serve is called Pacific Garden Mission, and they have now a 30-day in, 30-day out policy. So if you've been there for 30 days, then you have to leave for 30 days. And so we find just different waves of people kind of in and out of those scenarios. And so I think some of that has to do with their funding being reduced, and also because funding's reduced in other areas of the city with services that would generally be offered. It's increased the amount of people going towards shelters and trying to find the emergency services that they would need.
We don't receive a lot of state funding, just about 6% of our funding comes from the state. But I did a graph on for our 25th anniversary, and I graphed that, and then I laid beside it the dot-com bubble and the recession and all the things that happened in society. And I found that usually after that, there was a two-year trickle-down thing where homelessness spiked. And so from the state impasse that we're having, that preventative services have been cut or those agencies have closed, and everybody is tightening their belt, and it's not as much available for preventative services or the services that people were used to getting to prevent homelessness. We are seeing that spike now, and homelessness as far as the amount of people coming into the shelter asking for services spiked last year, and this year we're already at 27% of last year in 6 weeks. So I expect this year is going to be higher too. And as I did the graph, I wouldn't have known that. I wouldn't have picked that up unless I did this graph and did, set all these things aside and looked at how it impacts and how it trickles through.
Folks have other questions? Other questions?
When I was a kid in high school, I worked in a South Loop in a family business, and the only homeless people I ever came across were middle-aged or a little older guys on the street. But I never saw them anyplace else. And you can see them when you pull up to a stoplight, or you pull down an off-ramp on an expressway. Now I see homeless people everywhere. So my question is it a social phenomenon that is on the increase? Is it related, do you see it related to the economic cycle? Or are we just not as good today in a divided, isolated society in taking care of people who otherwise now have become homeless, whereas before they had somebody to turn to?
One thing that I see is, as the state has closed their mental health provisions, hospitals are closing their units, there are more people we are seeing in the homeless shelter, more individuals with mental health. And then when we get them, there's no place to get services for them. It's very difficult to get long-term services. So that's one element of homelessness that I see is increased because of lack of care. The other thing is family disputes. I just think that families are not having relationships that they used to have, and they're just kicking people out. I don't know. Kelly, what do you think? It's that, I'm seeing more homeless too. It's hard to quantify why we're seeing more. There aren't any good answers that I have.
I have to quickly insert this. When I lived in California, I remember hearing the stories about back when Ronald Reagan was governor, they closed the provision for the mentally ill, and there was a corresponding increase in the number of folks that they were seen in particular in places like San Francisco and Oakland. I remember my grandmother telling me that. She was a social worker. Anyways, I believe we had a question in the back.
Just real fast, I know you guys talked about giving services and how it's helping people get their birth certificates and people getting driver's license. But do you have people that come into your facilities that are trying to get disability and are having and they're able to get it? Well, do you guys provide services to help those people get disability and what they need to do that?
I don't have services to offer people who can't get their disability. We point them in the right direction. DePaul Law School has lawyers who work for folks like that. Sometimes we hear stories of people getting letters from a law firm in Utah that wants to pick up their case and try to win them their disability. And it always ends up like going on and on and on. And so we try to connect them to local places that we know are doing that type of work and put them onto those things. But personally, we don't have those types of skills.
Well, we do have quite a few youth who qualify in some way or another, and a lot of the caseworkers will help with the original application, always denied the first time. Second application, usually denied again. And so they at least help in the beginning process, but then we do have some local attorneys that we will help pick up the cases, and we help them through that. We've even done a payee once or twice just to try to help out till they could find a permanent payee. And so just kind of working locally with some people that has helped.
I have sent staff to training for Social Security, and we do work with them to set it up. We do work with them to, we take them for meetings and their interviews and their medical, and we will transport them to places and work with that to get them. Also, because they live with us and they're not just visiting us an hour once a week, and we do case management, we do notes about all that behavior. If the attorney asks us and there's a release of information, we can provide case management to support their claims or their behavior or what happened. So we have gotten several Social Security claims through that way.
Thank you.
If we're talking about homelessness, how about the people sort of charged with providing housing for low income people? What about the local housing authority? Are you successful in getting them to them, and is there enough Section 8 vouchers or openings in regular housing?
No. It's constantly changing the process, and so just keeping up on that. Section 8 now is like a lottery. It used to have a waiting list, and now it's a lottery. That's just changed in the last couple of years, and they have to reapply every 6 months. So if you did not get pulled out of the lottery in your 6 months, you have to reapply. So just trying to stay on top of that. So my staff usually have a stack of applications that take around to the 1st of July. And to have, our youth to reapply if they weren't able to get it. Housing, it kind of depends on a town. Seems like LaSalle, you get in a little faster. We try to, when the youth apply, a lot of it, like the workers just getting to know the application process, because if there's errors on the application, it could really affect what they get, if they're accepted, or sometimes if there's a lot of errors, it's just thrown away. But just helping them fill out the application properly, to mark the homeless section on there. Some youth are like, well, I don't want to mark that I'm homeless. And it's just like, well, you have to understand that's going to help you. That's going to possibly give you like a point system as far as it might move you to a different spot. So it's just, we try to encourage them to pick a community where they possibly have some type of support system, whether it's a friend or a relative or something, because we really like to try to connect them to their community. But yeah, there's just not enough Section 8 vouchers, not enough affordable housing. And then what we run into is that if a youth, because they make mistakes, or it could be adults, whatever, if they get evicted for not paying a utility or having an overnight guest or for too many days, then they can't go back for a certain period of time. And maybe this time they're serious and they're really trying. But you can't even afford a normal apartment on a minimum wage job. So once they lose that opportunity to get that housing, at least for a few years, that's really a struggle for them.
To demonstrate the randomness of the Section 8 housing, in May, we had a woman come to the shelter with 3 children, and she applied for Section 8 housing. We closed the end of May. We opened September 1st and closed May 30th. And we had moved her to the Chicago area to another program with her family. We had made sure that they had a place. We even gave them gas money and everything, and made sure that they got there. And 2 days after she arrived, she was notified by LaSalle County that she'd won the Section 8 housing lottery. And so we had to have her come back down. She didn't have the money, so we gave her the money for the rent deposit and everything for a place in Streeter. So random, it's completely random. No waiting.
This really is a lot. You have to understand, this really is a lot of you. Take it and do not lose it.
Yeah. We were really excited about that, but somebody else was really disappointed. They'd waited longer, it's random.
I have a statistic in front of me. It says Illinois is the 16th most expensive state in terms of housing affordability. You would need to work 101 hours at the minimum wage per week to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment rented at fair market price. Or you need to be able to make $20.87 an hour, working 40 hours a week, to afford a two-bedroom apartment at a fair market rate in the state of Illinois, to give you some idea of what that looks like. I think we have time for one more question. One or two, maybe? Well,
I think people are here because we have a heart for the cause and want to help. What are concrete ways people can help homeless people in each of your situations? Youth, LGBTQ youth, maybe locally and beyond.
that's a great question. Where anybody want to begin with that? How can folks out there help? Start with you.
Volunteer. The first thing you need to do is when you meet someone who's homeless, you need to listen. Listen with your heart and your head. Both. Don't let one lead the other. Listen. I think you said non-judgmentally, trust, whatever. My motto in the shelter is, trust everything they say, but verify it. Not in front of them, but you can't help someone perpetrate a lie forever and get ahead. So you do need to listen, and you need to listen with an open heart. But understand while you're listening with your heart that your head has to make decisions. How best can I answer this? What am I hearing? What am I processing here that I can ask the next question? Or I can ask a question that would lead to a relationship. Or I can share something that leads to a relationship. Not just, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And do that. So, listening is really an important thing. You said that you see homeless everywhere. And it's right. I mean, I go into IVCC and I see homeless individuals who are in the shelter attending IVCC. I walked right by someone. We had 75 kids in the shelter last year, and they're all going to your schools. They're out there. They live here, and they're without a home. So the next thing is volunteer. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities. I'm sure there are with you, Kelly. We have volunteer slots at the shelter that are always empty. So go to www.idpads.com if you're interested. Fill out an application, you'll get some training, you'll see the shelter, and you'll be able to do that. And then giving, material things. All these charities, all of us sitting here need material things, office things, laundry soap, things for houses, or financial support. Huh?
I was going to say money.
Financial support. The last one is financial support. But the most important one that I think is prayer. Is pray for those people you see, pray for the charities, pray for, you know, if you had to carry the weight of everybody else's problems every day at work, burnout becomes a problem. It really does. And so just pray for them.
And she talked about volunteering, said, I mean, and pick something you're passionate about. If you're not going to commit to it, if you're not going to be real, if you're not going to be honest, they can see through it in a heartbeat. So pick something that you're passionate about and stick with that. So if you like to cook, go to this, you know, or whatever, go to the soup kitchen. They're always probably needing volunteers. And then after you're done, maybe sit and talk. I mean, and interact. But like I said, be honest, be real, be there, you know. Like I said, PADS always needs volunteers. We could use some things, as well as soup kitchens. And I think that food pantry also I think is big. I mean, you can start, we talked about stigma and this and that. I remember when we first started getting some of our homeless funding, and I had to go to the shelter for the first time, probably about 15 years ago. I was a little nervous. I didn't even know Ottawa had a shelter, you know, and I was just nervous about going. And so now my son's been there. You know, he's given half his Halloween candy to homeless. He wants to do, you know, because he's aware of it. And then pass on some positive experiences to your children so that they don't, the stigma, you know, they don't grow up with that stigma. And they know there's a homeless shelter and how can I help and get them to volunteer. And I think really raising kids to think homelessness is, you know, it's out there and it's real, and get them involved.
I wanted to share this earlier, and I'm going to share it now. Give a hug. I was newly minted executive director. I was hired in August, and in February that year, I got a call at 6 o'clock in the morning that a 28-year-old mother of two died in the bed in our shelter. It was one of the things that completely changed my universe in thinking about things. She had been struggling. She was taking a CNA course. She had epilepsy. That's what was the cause of her death. And she had been really struggling. And one night she came in just really non-compliant, very angry, very verbal. And the staff came to me. I happened to be in the shelter that night, and they said, you know, she's just acting out something awful, and you know, we're going to have to put her out if she doesn't calm down. And I said, well, bring her in and let me talk to her. So I talked to her, and she said, well, I just had a bad day. Don't think I passed a test, and you know, this is just really hard, and my kids and you know, all this stuff. And I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, you know, you can stay tonight if you'll go to bed and just kind of relax. Go lay down in bed for 10 minutes. Just kind of chill out. And if you can get up and you can get along and calm down some, we can do this tonight. And I gave her a hug. It was 2 days later I got the call that she was gone. And afterwards, I was told that she had come back and was looking for me because it had been a long time since a perfect stranger gave her a hug. And it meant a lot. Smile, hug, care. You never know. You never know what that's going to be like tomorrow.
I think there's a lot of different ways that you can help. So for us, I have a lot of different youth who had to drop out of high school because of experiencing homelessness. So we do a lot of studying for GED tests. We do a lot of studying for geography and anthropology at COD. And so any kind of people who are interested in that, we are always looking for people who want to be tutors to our youth. Mentors, if somebody is interested in being a mentor for some of our young people. Those are some of the best relationships for some of them. I had one of our youth recently who was texting his mentor this weekend because, you know, there was a bad relationship thing, and so they worked through it. And there are times when I can say whatever I want to them, but if somebody else says that same thing, it gets through. And so having those other support systems around really does help some of them really understand things and work through things. I'll just give one example. We have one of our youth right now who's very artistic, but kind of like that oddball kind of kid. Like, doesn't really have much that he can like get along with other people, but he's really into guitar. And so we had a donor actually drop off an amplifier for him, I think last week. And so he sat probably in my office for about like an hour, and it kind of did get a little bit annoying after a while, but seeing him just like sitting there like strumming for an hour straight and there's like a smile on his face the entire time, because that was like his escape, and he can't afford to have that. So just those little things sometimes can just be life-changing for some of these kids, and he's, I'm sure, playing it probably right now. I mean, he's been playing it since. So those little things, even if it's not, you know, giving money or giving time, sometimes just those things of connecting those different things and finding those social supports for them is really crucial.
I know I'm a little bit farther away in Chicago, but I would echo, please pray for us. If you do want to support us financially, there's ways to do that online, southloopcampusministry.org. But then, other than that, we are always looking to partner with churches. If you do want to bring a group, I know it's a longer drive, but on a Sunday night for a meal, we'd love to host you and give you a chance to sit down and experience our community for a night. We do a lot of singing and celebrating and karaoke, and so if you're a singer, you can come and show us your talents and as we eat. And so it's a good time, and I'd invite you to come out and join us and meet our people. And if you'd also, too, I mean, it's obviously cold weather setting in. If you're a church that pulls together, you know, collections of warm weather goods, underwear, those types of things, we're always looking for churches to drop off just loads of that stuff, and we'll find homes for it.
All right. So with that, I think we're gonna wrap this up. We have refreshments in the other room. I want to thank all four of our panelists for sharing their stories, for sharing their thanks to you guys